Our next speaker, Keiti Kljavin, is an urbanist, operator of the Estonian Urban Lab, Linnalabor, and editor of Estonian Urbanists Review, as well as teaching staff member at the Estonian Academy of Arts. She gives lectures and supervises urbanism and interior design, master thesis at the Faculty of Architecture. Estonian Urban Lab is a focal point for studying cities, urban issues and phenomena, which projects involve scientific, social and artistic methods. Keiti will now present the story about the estates of non-urban. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Dagnia. Thank you, Dina, for the invitation. I will continue the sitting situation of an Estonian. So, I slightly also changed my title to have a little a kind of an direction of my notes and thinking, which I present on base of my work with those intermediate or in-between spaces, which are not centers or they are centers of an in-betweenness in Estonia. I think, and this also kind of in a way continuing the panel session that we had. So many questions addressed there I will try to address in my presentation as well. So we have already heard in many presentations this kind of discourse of planetary urbanization and the case where the cities are now almost like without an exception cast as solutions to this economical and political and as well as a problem of a climate crisis. And the thesis that everything has become urban is in tune in proclaiming that cities have triumphed and can be studied scientifically. But time to time in this discussion, I feel as an urbanist and or sometimes in other roles as well, that we seem to veer between this non-nonsense accommodation to the wishes of rather speculative real estate, also those techniques and techno-driven utopias of smart cities. And then again, in my work, really much this kind of dewy-eyed urbanism of cities of people. So it has kept me thinking of what is there for the non-urban. And even if we realize from a Marcus presentation that everything is connected, is it connected through market forces or other ways of networking? And especially the question what the architecture has to do with it. This is just a side slide of one of the studios that I've been running for a couple of years at the Academy of Arts. And this studio touched or was located in an interesting location, the border of Estonia and Latvia, a small city called Valga. It's a twin city, and it has had a decrease and increase in population due to historical changes of being at the one and then also kind of in two places. So, and also Valga has become, especially Valga, the Estonian side, has become a kind of a poster guy for the city who manages this shrinking situation really well. So they have actually kind of admitted the case that we won't grow, and they try to adapt their urban space and try to find solutions. And one of them is this greening, and that's one of my students' kind of reflections of this idea of this historical city being taken over nature. Of course, the rural has co-constituted the urban as a mode of production. And if we look at the history of architecture, then architecture modernism, of course, has experienced it before, the forms of this counter-urbanization, and then this urbanization to overcome this urban-rural divide. Proposal of Soviet urbanists to even out this divide culturally and economically was about visioning those deurbanized territories, erasing these distinctions between city and the country. And they were adopting those linear models of industrial settlements and mixing them with small-scale residential units, all, of course, connected with infrastructure and greenery. Their theorizations mainly were kind of nipped in the bud, and it would seem that the socialist experiment in the East rose and fell with the countryside intraceable to the productive collectivization of agriculture. So today's presence of mining, extraction, and other forms of source industrial operations have since then, since long, problematized these urban-rural categories. And yet this post-industrial transformation in the East and the West have rather amplified than diluted this urban-rural divide. And this has posed many questions and challenges about this question of centrality of non-agricultural programs to this non-urban realm or this countryside. So in short, I will conclude is that the rural question problematized the urban-centric category of this post-industrial city. This is the rural which I'm little talking about, and that's kind of an assemblage of unwanted uses that don't neatly fit into this normalizing frame of so-called smartness, and this latter which it constitutes, I mean, logistics spaces, data centers, landfills, rare earth metal mines, and in my work also most distressingly those expendable populations. So this is 24-hour lit landscape of those smart technocratic architectures, and it's one of the biggest pellet producers in Europe and one of the biggest independent renewable energy producers in the Baltic Sea region. It's their production site near in Võrumaa, it's Osula pellet, and this is very well for me personally a sign of arriving to my country house, and a really good reminder of what these global forces are actually who are shaping these depopulated hinterlands of these small centers. And there has actually been discussions in Estonia, I think it was like January, about to zone Estonia into two areas. So there will be kind of more developed Harju County, and then with the capital, obviously, and then there are other Estonian, or the other Estonian, and it's about maintaining the funding of EU money for neighboring municipalities of capital. But then again, I would rather ask what the city-state of Tallinn do if there would not be this other side of Estonia. Large estates of infrastructure and land exploitation in this rural backyard makes me question where does the current industrial activities of Tallinn seaside will then dissolve. Seaside is just a kind of an example here, but in a way we can ask where those activities will be deported to make room into this foreseen post-industrial chic future surrounded by brownfields of temporary uses and this urban wilderness we are talking. And in many cases also we think about gentrified areas in northern Tallinn and so on. It's also a question about what kind of feelings or the displacement it will create and further conflicts it will introduce to the people who have actually bargained for the peace and serenity of the seaside living, not those extra services. So my question without an answer is that can the rural be addressed as a co-constitutive but also kind of exceeding the urban, and or even the city as a hinterland to the countryside? Obviously, the influence of urbanization and suburbanization, I'm talking here in the context of Baltics, are really heavy and even stronger on the local communities than the outmigration and low birth rates of the state level. So as a result, this Baltics in flux, as we have named it, their internal communities are actually losing population, jobs, services at a very varying pace depending on their size and location. So smaller communities that are further away from the capital are likely more to shrink, and there's a kind of a statistic that they will shrink more quicker than the average. So those people in those small kind of areas, which I think is really well framed by this quote you can read, they are actually having they're living in the surroundings of vacant dwellings and outdated public spaces, and they are cornered in their, for sure, their beloved but subjectively stigmatized peripheral homes, and which is also maybe not discussed today, is that their real estate value is objectively decreasing. It has no value. They are trapped. So then again, another question, what this rural drama holds for the urban, or is it even a right way to pose this question? And I will try to illustrate, so kind of taking together some of my field works and so I do a consultancy for those municipalities, and I do speak a lot with locals, and I try to make this snippets or these observations more clear on 2 points. The first thing I'm calling, it's kind of the limits of competitiveness, this kind of vicious circle of regional polarization. I think Estonian regional policy is built on the principles of competitiveness, and as well this other word, this innovation. So many rural areas and small towns in Estonia have been searching for ways to foster their local capital, local development. And considering this decreasing importance of agriculture and the heavy industry, the one strategy has been supported by the EU funding schemes in the early 2000s is this kind of diversification of the rural economy, for example, those projects by Leader slogan. So this has actually increasingly include those image-making strategies. It's in urban space, it can be also seen as these place-making strategies and brandings, and many rural settlements or dense areas or small center, however you call the baby, are actually really working with those image makings and those development strategies. So I've had a serious conversations with either the head of the municipality about, what kind of, sculpture or what kind of tower we need to build, or, looking for those landmarks. But this active placemaking has not been successful in all cases. And it's also, it's not only me, but social scientists and other researchers saying that this is spatially blind, and it's non-interventionist policy, which vice versa has become kind of an obstacle for the rural development, and it's ultimately actually privileging the urban areas. So I guess one thing is that this foreseen changes in Estonian future status within this EU cohesion policy is a good way for us to open up the opportunity to actually discuss how those rural peripheral areas can access those development resources. And maybe by fostering this debate, this vicious circle that reproduces regional polarization between those major urban areas and the rest of the country can hopefully be interrupted. The second point, yes, I'm calling it the circle of insufficient urban competence. I think it has, and maybe my colleagues can back me up, is that from Estonia, is that this in Estonian architectures or planning circles, it has been long discussed that we need more competence. We need more architects, planners working in not only on their speciality, but other job places as well in local municipalities. And so mainly the discussion has been about the lacking of the competence, or this kind of an unevenness of the competence. And it's also in line with the last administrative reform Estonia had, that there are now more resources to hire those people due to this population increase and the tax revenue per municipality. But it is likely that those areas with shrinking population with less people will hire, one specialist working in a larger territory, covering more than one municipality. The calculations be that one specialist for an area of 10,000 inhabitants. And it is obviously kind of good economics, and it's understandable since, if you just count the planning workload of the specialist, it's a valid solution. But there can be also shortcomings, and that one is that the specialist is kind of working on wheels, not only about congestion or the sustainability issues, but that his work or in a local situation can be in a way symbolically displaced, and it's also can be true that the worker has less access to the needs and the peculiarities of those places. So I'm just asking here again, what is this role of this specialist at first, and their competence, and then also it raises the question of this local community and how they also can have an access to those changes in their areas. So I have a kind of a doubt today that in portions of this rural or non-urban real, those specialists are having in mind still to transform it into this imaginary retreat of those hectic city lives, something that Mart also showed, those nice farm stays. And that's kind of place where you can, place your, ideas of this non-capitalist way of living, or the self-realization and face-to-face community. But I think this is a little more complicated. So I'm asking is that, so what forms and typologies have perpetuated the rural idyll already, and what are the forms and typologies which really can work rather than these imaginary aspects from the rural? And this is a good example, or kind of one example, that we are connecting those small places with those, I'll call them bike highways. And obviously from my work, I can say that some of the choices by giving alternatives to people are made, so they use them as they are meant to be, and they use them also as just recreational space, which you take your dog out or something similar, because they are often lit and so on. But as an spatial structures, they fail, since if they enter the small-scale areas, they don't change. So it's quite difficult to adapt into these structures in general. So I will end up with a loan of rephrasing Cole Roscom, and asking that whether we, I mean all of us in the field, can we reconcile our impulses to redefine and also to reimagine those spaces with the understanding that we ourselves constitute influential carriers of those new practices, forms and tastes that automatically transform what rurality looks like, where it exists and how it performs. The standard modes and means by which the discipline has historically participated within the rural no longer suffice. Architects need not to frame the rural as a site for acquiring more urbane form and structure, but rather acquisites to the reality that the urban has always been required for the rural. That has been already said today several times. So I would just suggest that there is no actual urgent need for more and more competence, but there is really a need for a better understanding what those non-urban actually hold. This is short. Thank you.